and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. I am your host Tyrant, and in today's episode we're going to be taking a look at a pair of crowbars, specifically through, the context, the lens of the Eminence in Shadows anime. I watched most of the first season. I wasn't too taken with it, but it wasn't bad either. Now, the reason why I'm covering this is one of you guys has been graciously leaving the exact same comment over 40 times. Yes, over 40 times asking me to cover this very specific topic and subject matter. So I thought, why not finally do it? So if you want me to cover a specific topic, just leave 40 comments over the span of a year and I'll get right around to it. I'll get around to it. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because we're not talking about one large crowbar that's perhaps about the size of a sword or whatever, right? He actually dual wields two smaller crowbars. Now, a crowbar is an interesting weapon because this is just a piece of solid steel. It has basically a right-angled point and a bit more of a, thrusting point, if we want to put it that way. So in terms of a base level weapon, it's pretty gnarly, about the same sort of level that you would get from maybe a wood splitting axe or maybe like a shovel, just sort of any sort of gardening implement that you turn into a weapon. I would put the crowbar in a similar sort of category. It's something that perhaps isn't designed as a functional weapon, but can absolutely be used as a very devastating weapon. I expect today's episode to be rather straightforward and simple, but there will be a little bit of nuance. So let's get to it. All right, so the crowbar as a weapon by itself is absolutely a beast, right? And don't worry, we'll hit some things, we'll smash some things because obviously that's fun and I want to have some fun in today's episode. But let's talk about some of the nuance, right? Because in the anime, he's fighting a lot of, combatants that have swords. Now, the problem with this is when you actually look at the length differential, it's got a lot of extra reach on this. So, obviously I'm able to hit an opponent. You have a huge reach advantage, but there is a little bit of nuance here because obviously you are dual wielding. And not only are you dual wielding, but you're dual wielding something that has a parry mechanic. Now, do I think that you would be able to beat someone with a long sword if you had a pair of shorter crowbars? If you're fighting a skilled combatant, I would probably say no. Honestly, I'd probably say no. I'd be using the curved point on the crowbar as a thrusting point in my main hand. So using that curve to get the blade out of the way to be able to actually thrust with the main point. That's how I would probably end up using this sort of dynamic, right? Even though they can kind of parry the blade rather well, they don't actually trap the blade in any sort of way. It's just, a hexagonal piece of steel. So there's not actually anything that grips the blade. There's nothing that actually holds it here. You don't have any torque or leverage on it. It's literally just moving the blade out of the way, which means it's very easy to retreat the blade and then present it forward again. So if I was to parry a blade like this, right, with the hook, the biggest issue is sliding straight onto my fingers. It's very easy to get the hands and the fingers because they have pretty much no defensive capabilities. So you're kind of in that weird spot where it's like, they're actually pretty good at parrying, right? They're pretty good at thrusting as well because you do have a nice stopper here. It's solid steel. These things are very beastly, and that's not even including the blunt force that they can do. Problem is, I don't really have much defensive options with them. In terms of the dual wielding aspect, I actually don't have too much issues with it, right? Dual wielding is one of those things where you just really have to be skilled enough, essentially. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about dual wielding two full-length swords. That's not really what we're talking about. In terms of dual wielding, the best way to kind of do it is to have a reasonable blade in your main hand and then something smaller, perhaps like a dagger, or perhaps something like this, for example, in your offhand. That's probably the best bet when it comes to dual wielding. So having two smaller blades, obviously it'd be more preferable to have one that's a bit longer, so then you have that reach. Did you know that less than 50% of you guys are actually subscribed? Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Huh? Come on, subscribe. They absolutely they obliterate things from existence. Like, there's no other way to describe it, right? But there's an interesting thing here, because in the anime, he uses it a couple of different ways. First and foremost, he uses them as blunt weapons. Obviously, that's how you would use this sort of weapon, of course. But he also kind of uses them like tonfas. Now, tonfas are interesting because, I mean, they're a martial art weapon, same kind of category as other martial art weapons, which I really just don't want to go into because it's a whole thing in and of itself. Needless to say, crowbars are a little bit different, especially when you get to the length that he uses. First off, they're heavy weapons. Using them like tonfas, they're really hard to spin around because it's a hook, not a handle. So when I try and spin it around, yeah, I can kind of do it, kind of get stuck sometimes, but you kind of can do it. They can be used to block the forearms like tonfas would be. You can strike with them. However, with these sorts of weapons, they would primarily obviously be used using either the pick to absolutely... I am gonna smash Tony's head. The weight and the force that you can put into these things, absolutely beastly. But like I said, we have the big caveat that there isn't really any hand protection, and that is the biggest detriment when it comes to these things, in my opinion, because what are you going to be fighting against? If you're fighting against unarmored people, literally anything that is a force multiplier is a good weapon against someone who has no weapon at all. But when you have a weapon, obviously reach is your biggest advantage. These ones have not much reach, but at the same time, I think they make up for that with their oomph. But you can also thrust with them. Blunt end. A lot of force you can put in these motherfuckers, right? I mean, we have our pumpkin. You guys have seen this 1,000 times. Again, pick end, we can actually hook onto things. Oh, that fell down. Well, let me pick that back up, put that right there. Want to use the blunt end? Absolutely. Obliterates it. So final verdict on dual wielding some of these smaller crowbars. All right, so it's pretty self-explanatory. They are deadly and dangerous weapons on their own before we even compare them to anything. Obviously, against any sort of, unarmed or even unarmored opponents, these things are going to be pretty dangerous. They're not designed to be weapons, right? But they're pretty fucking good at it, honestly. The problem you're going to run into is fighting larger weapons, right? The reach on these is not very good, and they really don't have any good defensive capabilities. But this is where, if you were really trying to theory craft things, you could just say it's all down to the skill of the users, essentially. Now, they do have clear and present, positives, but they also have some downsides. It's one of those rare times where an anime weapon is something rather simple. But with that out of the way, thank you guys for watching. I genuinely hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe, leave a comment down below what you thought of today's episode, and as always, I'll see you next week in another episode.